I'm going to go to Hebrews chapter 1. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start a new collection of talks, a new series, if you will. And this series, I'm titling it this, Christianese. Christianese. If you've ever heard me say that before, or ever heard any Christian or pastor, preacher, teacher say that within our faith, they're basically saying that there are things, terms, phrases within our Christian faith that Christians use that are exclusive to Christians. Some reason Christians just understand these phrases, and we call it Christianese as if it is its own unofficial language. So I'm going to start tonight talking about Christianese, strange things that Christians say. So we're going to start in Hebrews chapter 1, and this is going to be our kind of theme verses, these first three verses, for the next few weeks. I don't know how long this is going to go on for. It just depends how many of these things I can come up with. But we're just going to start here tonight. So let's look in verse 1, and it says this. It says, "Throughout our history, God has spoken to our ancestors by his prophets in many different ways. The revelation he gave them was only a fragment at a time, building one truth upon another." Verse 2 says this, "But to us living in these last days," that means today, these last days here on the earth, which is our time now, God now speaks to us openly in the language of a son, the appointed heir of everything. For through him God created the panorama of all things and all time. And verse 3 reads this, "The Son is the dazzling radiance of God's splendor, the exact expression of God's true nature, his mirror image. He holds the universe together and expands it by the mighty power of his spoken word. He accomplished for us the complete cleansing of sins and then took his seat on the highest throne at the right hand of the majestic one." So, there are a few things that we can observe from this scripture already, and that is what I want to do. The two things that I wrote down that we can observe from these scriptures are this: God speaks or reveals who he is to us, to his children. He wants to, and that is what he does. He speaks and he reveals who he is to us. And then the second thing is this: he does this through Jesus, through his son, Jesus. He speaks and reveals who he is, God the Father, through the depiction, the display of his son, Jesus, who put on skin and bone, dwelt among us, who was a real person, who really did have blood in his veins and died for us, an actual human being in flesh, Jesus. That is how he reveals himself to us. And these verses even go as far as to say that Jesus, the person of Jesus, thinking about this, I love the way that verse says this. It says Jesus is a language, the language of a son. Jesus himself is a language that speaks. So in this series, we're going to look at this unofficial language that us followers, us believers have made up, that we've been making over generations, and that is what I'm going to refer to as Christianese. Like I said, it's just this short term to describe phrases and things that Christians say. And I believe at the heart of this series, the whole point is that you would recognize that the purpose is not that you would feel offended or that you would feel made fun of or that you would feel judged, because we're all believers if we claim to be a follower of Jesus and we claim to believe in his name. Then we're all in that same boat, meaning we've probably said these things. We've probably fell victim to speaking Christianese, and we're all in that same boat. The purpose is not that you would feel judged, but that you would have a greater awareness as to the effects of speaking this unofficial Christianese and these phrases that we use. Because the reason that that is so important is I believe this. I believe how you, and you may want to write this down, I believe how you perceive God will determine how you receive God. How you perceive God, how you see God, will ultimately determine if and how you receive Him as God the Father. And I want to share this quote from A.W. Tozer. It says this, and it'll be on the screen. It says, "We tend by a secret law of the soul to move toward our mental image of God." We tend to move forward toward our mental image of God, meaning we follow our perceptions of God most of the time, rather than the reality of who God really is. We follow the perception that we make up in our mind, this mental image of how we see God. That is the very thing that we end up following. So if we believe God is angry, we will function as so. If we believe God is indifferent and doesn't care about anything, we will function as so. If we believe God is always happy-go-lucky, we will function as so. And that's important because that mental image that we shape in our minds determines how we live our lives. So I believe this tends to negatively impact our relation with God, because more often than not, when we create this Christianese, strange things that Christians say, we're proliferating or we're mass producing this negative and inaccurate perception and persona of who God is. That's what we do oftentimes. So what we're going to do over these next few weeks is we're going to take some of the strange things that Christians say that I'll refer to as Christianese, and we're going to dissect those things, we're going to analyze those things, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take that language that we have created as followers of Jesus, which is oftentimes inaccurate, and we're going to compare that to what this verse calls the language of the Son, which is to say the true language of who Jesus really is, the true nature of who God really is. We're going to take what we have depicted God to be, and we're going to compare it to who He really is, and then we're going to see how that could impact our relationship with Him, which the language of the Son, just so you know, is the true representation of who God is through the lens of Jesus, which I believe if we can capture that, essence of who Jesus really is, I believe it will positively impact how we receive God, which in turn, as many of you know, can develop us, it can strengthen us, it can encourage us as Christians, and as we've been talking about, it can stretch our faith as believers. But there's a disclaimer here. I want you to understand that I'm looking at the context of what the phrases I'm going to be using. I'm going to be looking at the context of what they imply more so than just the phrase itself. So don't get surface level with me. Just because I say a phrase, don't think to yourself automatically like, how is that bad? Try to see beyond. Try to see the context. Try to see what that phrase could imply. That's what we're going to be looking at tonight. So here it is. Here's our first phrase. And again, don't get offended. Don't get upset. I've said it. You've said it. Here's our first phrase of Christianese. You need Jesus. You need Jesus. We've all, amen. We've probably all said this phrase, used this phrase, you need Jesus. You know, it usually goes something like that. You need Jesus, you know. Recently, Ivy and I, just returning from our vacation in California, I saw this sign, and I read it, and it was hanging from an overpass, and I see it, and it's just the letter U and then need Jesus on a big old poster board hanging from the overpass in California. And many of you are probably thinking, yeah, those people do need Jesus. No, chill out. That's not right. But anyways, that was hanging there, and I just thought to myself, I was like, that's interesting. This hit me while I was driving, and I was thinking to myself, what would be Jesus' take on this? And that's how this entire series, collection of talks, and message came to be, because I started thinking about, man, we use that phrase a lot. We have signs, we have shirts, and many, if not most of us, have used this phrase from time to time, even just as a joke. And it may be harmless, and we just say, "You need Jesus" to somebody. Or it may go as far as you're not joking, you really tell somebody you need Jesus. I'm just trying to be real with you. But as harmless and as innocent as this phrase seems, it really does have major implications to our perception of God. And catch this, I don't want you to get offended, I don't want you to get upset, because I'm putting myself in the same boat. I've said this phrase more times than not. Oftentimes when somebody tells me that they're a Georgia fan, I say, "You need Jesus." So we're all in the same boat here, okay? And so just so that you understand, I'm not knocking you, but let's just think about the implications of the phrase for a second. When I use the phrase as a way to say someone needs Jesus because they did something or acted a certain way that someone or myself may consider as unrighteous or morally incorrect, then what does that insinuate? What does that insinuate? If I say to you, "You need Jesus," and it is intended to say you need saving because you're obviously not getting it right, if you know what I mean, what does that imply? Well, that insinuates this. I'm just going to fill in the blank for you. Even if said in a joking manner, we all know there's a little bit of truth in our jokes sometimes, but what is the implication? What is it actually insinuating? Well, I believe that it is insinuating that if I tell you that you need Jesus, or you tell someone else that they need Jesus, that you have made yourself on a pedestal. You have some greater level of understanding, and now, because of saying that, as innocent and harmless as it may be, or may have came off, now you're more elite in your faith. And now, all of a sudden, subconsciously and unknowingly, I've elevated myself, which, what has that done to me? What has that done to me in my relationship with God? Well, if I've elevated myself subconsciously and unknowingly to think that I'm more elite or I'm further along in my faith, that's another one, and we'll get to these later, but I'm further along in my walk. Have you ever said Christian, or heard Christians say that? They're just not as far along as in their walk. When we say that, what is the implications? What is that doing to me in my relationship with God? Because that's important. That's very important. And I believe when we elevate ourselves in such a sense, we have lowered or hindered our awareness of God's revelation to us. And now, all of a sudden, because I've elevated myself to think I'm better than they are, the thems and the theys, now I've hindered my willingness to learn and grow myself. And it has negatively impacted my relationship with the Lord, even though I was simply and innocently and harmlessly trying to make a claim that Jesus can help you. But all of a sudden, I need to take the plank out of my own eye. Do you see what I'm saying there? It becomes... But here's the thing. There's a flip side. If I say this to someone else, what does that do to their perception of God? So we just talked about what it does to me, because now I've elevated myself. I think I'm better than them, even though it was subconsciously, unknowingly. If they ask me, "Do you think you're better than me?" I would say, "No, of course not." But you're just not as far along in your walk as, that's what we say behind their backs. No, of course not. But really, subconsciously, unknowingly, we have elevated ourselves. But what's the flip side? What has it done to their perception of God? Because that's what it's done to our perception of God. Oh, I'm already up here when God's still teaching me down here. Because I've elevated myself, and only God elevates man. Man doesn't elevate himself. So God's still trying to teach me something at this level, but subconsciously, unknowingly, I've elevated myself to this level, and I can't learn what I need to learn because I've hindered myself, because I've put myself above where God has me. Does that make sense? So what has it done now to their perception? Because it's a double negative. If someone walked up to me, "Man, you need Jesus," what is the implications? Well, I don't live up to the moral code. I don't live up to the moral standard. He's disappointed in me. He disapproves of my behavior. I'm unworthy. I'm unloved. I'm a failure. And it may not go down this rabbit hole. You're like, wow, you really have low self-esteem. But it may not be that serious. But the implication is, if you tell me I need Jesus, then I need fixing, which has now impacted my perception of God just the same. And you see, this doesn't push me towards Jesus. It actually keeps me at a distance because I feel unworthy. So it's just a double negative here, and it's negatively impacted both parties receiving what God really has for them. Now, I feel like I need to say this before I go any further, because if maybe you're thinking to yourself, oh, Levi, I say this phrase. I've said this phrase. I have the T-shirt. This is, as I said, not intended to discourage you or make you overthink every time you go to speak, or to fear judgment for wearing certain clothing with these phrases on it. That's not the intention at all. That's not what this is about. The purpose is that so we can be mindful that just because we hear these phrases, it does not make them true, nor do they reflect God's nature or character. Because here's the thing, and maybe we all need to hear this tonight, and we all may know this, but it's not something that we often think about. The real truth is not that you need Jesus. The real truth is that not he needs Jesus. The real truth is not that she needs Jesus. The real truth is not they need Jesus. The real truth is not the thems need Jesus. The real truth is that we need Jesus. It's like the most obvious thing I could say, but it's the easiest thing that we forget. The truth is we all need Jesus, but there's a greater truth here. And this is what I want to end with. This is what I want to capture the heart of as I close out this message. I want us to realize that when we look at this phrase, you need Jesus, when we look into this phrase, you need Jesus, when we look at the different phrases that we're going to in this collection of talks, we have to look at the greater truth. Because if I left it there, that's not a good enough truth. That's not a good enough truth, because that's not the truth. The truth is not that you need Jesus, but the truth is also not that we need Jesus. That is true, but what's the ultimate truth? What's the greater truth? What can we grasp from these phrases and this phrases in particular? Well, when we look at the phrase, you need Jesus, we have to compare it to the language of the Son, as Hebrews tells us, which is through the lens of the Son. Who is the Son? The Son is Jesus. So we have to ask ourselves, does this reflect Jesus at all? His nature, his character? Would Jesus say, or would Jesus suggest in a serious manner, would he say, you need Jesus? Now, I'm not talking about the jokes. Obviously, we get the jokes. I'm saying, would the heart of Jesus ever say to another person in a serious manner, you need Jesus? Hey, you need me. Would Jesus ever do that? Which has, as I've shown you, so many negative connotations. Because to say you need Jesus and to mean it really implies a lot more than just the need for Jesus. Well, let's look at the language of the Son and find out. So I want you to look with me at Psalms 139, verses 7 through 11. It says, where could I go from your spirit? Where could I run and hide from your face? Verse 8, if I go up to heaven, you're there. If I go down to the realm of the dead, you're there too. If I fly with wings into the shining dawn, you're there. If I fly into the radiant sunset, you're there waiting. Wherever I go, your hand will guide me. Your strength will empower me. It's impossible to disappear from you. or ask the darkness to hide me. For your presence is everywhere, bringing light into my night. Now let's look at Romans 10:13, and it says this. It says, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Now here's the greater truth that I want you to realize. We say you need Jesus, but Jesus would say you have Jesus. Jesus would say, you have Jesus. You have me. Here I am. Your ever-present help in time of need. Your friend that sticks closer than a brother. I'm near. I'm available. I love you. I choose you. I accept you. You don't need me. See, we as humans, we've made it all about where we lack instead of recognize that we've made it all about, well, you need Jesus. And I'm like, for a moment, I'm talking about someone who really means this, like the sign that I'm seeing in the heart of the person that put it up there. And I'm talking about that kind of attitude towards somebody saying, you need Jesus. Why is the message as Christians not you have Jesus? Not telling them that they already have Jesus, but letting them know that God's true nature, God's true character, the person of Jesus wants you to know He's here. He's available to you. You can have Jesus if you want Jesus. He is your answer. There is an out. There is an alternative. The life you're living, if you want to be different, you can be encouraged. You have Jesus. And this is what I want you to recognize as we go throughout this collection of talks. I want you to see how our simple little phrases, as innocent and harmless as they may be, they've distorted God, our perception of who God is, which has negatively impacted our relationship to God because we can't receive Him quite correctly because we constantly see Him as, you need Jesus. Like, you got to get it together. You're really screwing up. Like, He's always angry with us. Like, He's always upset with us. And like, He's not available. Like, He's not near. That He's not open. That He's not arms spread wide, willing to take you in at any moment. Like, He's not upset with you. These scriptures say, where could I hide from you? I can't escape from you. You're obsessed with me. You choose me. You love me. That bad thing I did last night or last week or last month, it wasn't enough to make a delta, to make a divide between us. You want me, and I can have you. And I don't want the message to be, you need Jesus, to the world outside. I don't want the sign on the overpass to say, you need Jesus. I want people to recognize that Jesus, His true character is that He wants us and that He is available and that there is an alternative and that there is a better life. There is a new way. And that little shift in perspective can change how people receive you and I as Christians. And it can change the way people receive our God because they see His true nature as not angry with them, not upset with them, but willing and ready to receive